through the story of the golden calf. Yesterday we saw a lot of questions that need to be answered. And today I'm going to give you a way to look at the story, which I think is, in terms of the actual simplest reading of the verses, is very straightforward, even though many commentators say this, and they say it straightforwardly, but it doesn't require any difficult moves to make it fit. There are a few things that we have to justify, and I'll point them out and justify them as we go through. So, this is the beginning of chapter 32. The people saw Moses delayed ascending the mountain. The people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "We have a problem and we need a solution. The problem is Moses is gone. The solution has to be to replace Moses. Otherwise, the whole scenario doesn't make any sense." The question is, who's Moses? What is Moses? What role does he play? Why is it that they feel threatened that Moses is missing? As we pointed out yesterday, they didn't deify Moses. They say this man, Moses. Now, he played a number of different roles, but the one that is motivating them is this: all the miracles that they experienced came to them through Moses. He predicted them. He performed various actions which triggered them. He is the one through whom the divine power reaches them. With him missing, their fear is to be disconnected. And their thought is that they're going to have a statue take the place of Moses. Now you say, well, wait a second. I mean, a statue? Why would you go to a statue? Moses is a man. How about Moses' brother, who's standing there in front of you? You know, if you want a replacement for a man, why not pick a man? Well, how old is Moses when this is going on? He's 80 years old. The text says so explicitly. How old is his brother Aaron? 83. People die. If you're going to use a person as your intermediary, then you're guaranteeing crisis after crisis of connection. So a statue has a certain virtue that it will be semi-permanent. I mean, it could be stolen and it could be destroyed, but it's certainly more permanent than a human being. Now you say, come on, Rabbi, a statue? Isn't Judaism against statues in principle? You're not allowed to make statues. Well, maybe not exactly. If you take a look on page 447, you have a picture there of the Aron, the ark. And as you see, there's a cover to the ark, which is called the kapporos, solid gold, with the forms of two angels of solid gold sitting on top of the Aron, which had the tablets, which the 10 pronouncements of Sinai were written, in the Holy of Holies. A statue in the Holy of Holies. And not only is this statue there, but if you take a look on the next page, take a look at verse 21. You shall place the cover on the ark from above, and into the ark shall place the testimony of the tablets that I shall give you. It is there that I will set my meetings with you, and I will speak to you from atop the cover, from between the two cheruvim, the two angels that are on the ark of the testimonial tablets. That's where the voice comes from. It comes from heaven to the spot between the two angels, and from that spot goes to Moses. So this statue is precisely the intermediary between God and the Jewish people. And it is prescribed that you must make this statue, and you must use this statue. Now, yes, there's some question as to whether this was prescribed after the golden calf or before the golden calf, and that could have some influence on the status of it, but it can't be totally impossible. It can't be at a sacrilege. It can't be a kind of idol worship if God himself tells you that that's the way he wants to have the intermediary between him and the Jewish people. So when they're asking over here in 495 for a statue to be the intermediary, that's not an impossibility. So you say, okay, we hear that, this gold statue, but there it was angels, and here it's a calf. True. That's true. There it's angels, here's a calf. So what? I mean, do you have any reason to think that it has to be angels? That it couldn't be a calf? I mean, that's not obvious to you, and you don't have any verses to support it with. And even if that were the case, that would hardly be called an example of national idol worship. It would rather be, you're looking for a way to replace Moses, and there are rules for doing that, and you made a mistake in how you should replace Moses. That's not called idol worship. Idol worship means you worship a different God. But that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is putting in a replacement for Moses to link with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Moses himself, who Moses was the link to, and now they're replacing him with another link. So that makes sense out of verse 5, which we said was a bomb, when Aaron says, a festival of Hashem tomorrow, and nobody protests, nobody says that's not wasn't the project. The project was to have a new religion, because it wasn't a project to have a new religion. And of course, if this is a new way of attaching to God's power, so to speak, so then it's a celebration of God. And indeed, when they make the tabernacle with the ark, with the cherubim, the angels on the top of the ark, there is a celebration. In fact, it's a multi-day long, elaborate celebration. So that fits this new scenario very nicely. Also, we asked, why do they specify they want these gods to go before us? Aren't there other things that gods do? When you have religion, you worship gods, it's not because they just take you on treks in the desert. As a matter of fact, as they traveled through the desert, the ark went before them. So that link, which links them to God's presence, that actually went before them, and that's the function of the link. This also helps with verse 4, because one of the problems in verse 4 is a chronological problem. How could you say that this thing you made now is what took you out of Egypt months ago? You can answer now, isn't this thing that took them out of Egypt? This thing is a link with the God that took them out of Egypt. And this thing serves as a kind of expression of God in the world, because he's going to operate through it to connect to them. So it definitely helps with that. Now you say, okay, Rabbi, that's fancy and it's nice, and you're putting a piece of the puzzle together. But what about the very first line in 495 where it says, make for us gods? What about that? Well, the answer is that the word that the English translator here translates as gods is a word that has multiple meanings. The word is the word Elohim. Sometimes that word refers to the Creator. Sometimes it refers to angels. And sometimes it could even refer to people. I'll show you. Take a look back. On page 311. Verse 15 at the top of the page. Now here, Moses is standing at the burning bush, and he has all sorts of objections against going down to Egypt, and God is answering the objections. And at this point, God is telling him that you won't do it alone. that Aaron, his brother, is going to be, so to speak, his right-hand man. He says, you, Moses, shall speak to him, Aaron, and put the words in his mouth. And I shall be with your mouth and with his mouth. Teach you both what you are to do. He, Aaron, shall speak for you, Moses, to the people. And it will be that he will be your mouth, and you will be his leader. It says in the English, and in the Hebrew it says Elohim. You will be Aaron's Elohim. I don't think that at any point in time Aaron thought his brother created the heavens and the earth. I don't think Aaron ever thought that his brother was God. But the word Elohim doesn't have to mean God. Here it means, just as they translate here, he'll be your leader. He'll be the one who will have the authority and correctness to give orders in God's name, and he will follow you. So when you use the word Elohim, it doesn't have to refer to God. Let me give you another source, two more sources, and then I'll take your question. Now, if you take a look on page 429. This is civil law. Situation is, Reuven gives an object to Shimon and asks Shimon to watch it and guard it. And Shimon agrees. Reuven goes off to the Bahamas for a month for a vacation, comes back, says, Shimon, give it back. And Shimon says, so sorry, it's gone. It disappeared, struck by lightning, it disintegrated, the dogs ate it, I don't know. He's got some excuse and doesn't have it. Well, this has to be adjudicated by the court. So the top of the page says, when they come to the court, the Shimon, who's supposed to watch it and protect it, he has to swear that he didn't use the item he's supposed to protect, because he had no permission to do that. For every item of a liability, etc., regarding the item which says this, to the court shall come both their claims. Whoever the court finds guilty shall be trouble to his fellow. That's the law that's being formulated here. All three times that the English says the words the court, the Hebrew says Elohim. So the word Elohim can refer to the court, which is people. And there's another case which we don't have in this book, but I'll tell you where it is. In the first book of Samuel, chapter 28. There, Samuel the prophet has died. Saul is in battle with the Philistines, and things are not going well. And he searches out and finds a necromancer, someone who can put someone in touch with the souls of the dead. You're not supposed to do that. That's against Jewish law. And Saul knows that. In fact, he tried to enforce that law, but he's sore afraid, and he searches out such a person and finds one. He says to her, raise up Samuel. And she goes through her mumbo-jumbo, and then she goes into shock. And Saul observes this, notices her shock, and says, what's wrong? What's the matter? And she says, Elohim ra'isi olim min ha'aretz. I see Elohim coming up out of the ground. Now, as a matter of fact, it is Samuel. As a matter of fact, Saul and Samuel have a conversation. So there's no question as to what it is she saw. And Samuel had the habit of traveling the length and breadth of the land of Israel every year. And it was only a short period of time since he had died. So she knows what he looks like. If you ask why she was in shock, some of the commentators say she was a phony, you know. That's the guy. Talk to him. You know. This is the only time it ever worked. She didn't expect it to work. She expected the phone to go through her phony game. At any rate, there the word Elohim is referring to the appearance of Samuel, a human being. So the word Elohim does not have to refer to God. So the suggestion is that in 495, the word Elohim is referring to that which represents God, expresses God's presence. That something through which God works, and that will be the intermediary through which God interacts and communicates with the people, with the people. So when they say, "Make us Elohim," what they mean is make us a godly expression of yourself, of God, so that we can be connected to Him. And the last thing that I want to say in this connection is this. The Mikdash, that houses the ark, the temple, so to speak, we have a verse in the Torah which says, "Mikdashiti ro'u," have awe for the Mikdash. So the Talmud already raises the obvious objection, awe for a building? Hello, what religion is that? That you have awe for a building? So where it says, no, it's not awe for the building. It's awe for the one whose presence inhabits the building, which is God. Okay, fine, that answers that question. But you still have to ask, why does the verse say you should have awe for the building? That's what the words say. And one answer is, well, yeah, you should have awe for God. How do you express awe for God? How do you act it out? You know, to be very flippant, you know, if God would walk into the room, I would stand up out of respect. But that doesn't happen. So God designates certain things in the world which represent Him, and by the way I treat those things, I act out my relationship to God. So if I'm going to have awe for God, I conduct myself with awe for the building that He tells us He causes His presence to dwell in. So that's the way I act out my awe for God. So this word Elohim, which refers to a godly thing where you act towards it in a way to act out the relationship with God, this word Elohim here refers to the link between God and the Jewish people. It does not refer to God, neither singular nor plural. Now, you had a question?
No, I was just going to mention, as in, I saw, going through Bereshit, the first time we're introduced to God, it says, they use the name Elohim. And a commentary says that it's because that name connotes judgment and fairness. So is that consistent among the examples where it's used to connote judgment and fairness, or is it fair?
Well, I'll tell you, it's an interesting question, and there's really a very rich literature on it. Let me just give you like a headline. It does connote justice and fairness, but that's an application of a deeper root meaning. And the deeper root meaning is to constrict, to enclose, to limit, to filter. Now, strict justice or strict judgment limits kindness. If kindness is the ultimate impulse, and sometimes kindness can be damaging because it's unbridled. You probably have heard the term tough love. So that's the idea that without the toughness, the love is going to cause damage. So it's always a matter of restricting and holding back and filtering. And justice is one of those examples. But here, if the infinite creator of the universe is going to communicate through a tiny physical object, that's infinite constriction. So the real meaning is this idea of constriction, of filtering, and that's what's being expressed here. So as I say, it's a very good question. Okay, so now we have an understanding of why they could say, "Make for us Elohim." That was one of the strongest items in favor of thinking that it was really idol worship, and that has now been, so to speak, neutralized. Okay, now let's go to verse 8. That was the indictment. And I told you to punctuate it, not the way it's written in the text. The punctuation was, they have strayed quickly from the way that I have commanded them. They have made themselves a molten calf, semicolon. They prostrated themselves to it, they sacrificed to it, and they said, this is your God, or gods, or this is your whatever it is, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. In other words, the first half is about the manufacture, and the second half is about the worship. And now the idea is this. The people, of adults, you have 1,200,000 Jews. That's not all the people that were there. But you have 1,200,000 Jews. Almost all of them wanted a replacement for Moses. That's what they offered their gold for, to create a statue to be a replacement for Moses. But there was a small group of approximately, who really took it as an idol, who really worshipped it as an idol. Now, if you think there was a small group, could you just sort of guess how big it might be? Could you pick a number out of the air? If you remember what we said yesterday? Well, how about the 13,000 who died? How about the 3,000 approximately men who died at the hands of the Levites? And those who died in the plague, and I said that we don't have any exact figure, but since there's a census before and a census afterwards, it can't be a large figure. Let's say it's 10,000. Those people died because they did take it as an idol. They did really worship it, those 13,000. But the rest of the 1,200,000 did not. So now, just like verse 8 separates into two halves, there are two groups. The first half talks about those who made the calf, and the second half of verse 8 talks about those who worship the calf. Now, when Moses comes down from the mountain, the Levites killed the 3,000, and the plague kills the 10,000. Then the question is, what about everybody else? Well, what did it say? Moses said, you've done a terrible crime, and I'll go back to God, and I'll talk to him. Maybe I can find atonement, some kind of mercy, some kind of stay of execution for your crime. And he goes up and he says, these people who committed a terrible crime, they made themselves gods of gold. Or Elohim. They made themselves a statue, a forbidden statue. And we asked yesterday, why is he only asking for a stay of execution or mercy for the least significant crime? Why isn't he asking you for prostrating themselves and offering sacrifices and declaring that this is... The answer is because he's not asking for the ones who worshipped it. He himself initiated executing the ones who publicly worshipped it. There's no way back for them. He's only asking for the ones who manufactured it. That crime. And that's what he asked for, and that's what he got. Now the question arises, okay, so you've put idol worship on the side, you've associated that with the 13,000, all the rest of the 1,200,000 aren't guilty of that. All they did wrong was to make the statue. What exactly is wrong with that? Indeed, there seems to be the possibility of absolute destruction for simply making the statue. What is so terrible about making the statue that would put them in the danger of being destroyed that Moses has to plead with God not to do that? Now go back to verse 8, and that will explain why. In the beginning of verse 8, you have the first clause. It says, they have strayed quickly from the way which I have commanded them. The Torah is a system of obeying commands. The Torah isn't a system which is the fruit of religious intuition or religious experience or religious theorizing or religious hypothesizing or religious conjecture or religious creativity. It's a system in which the creator of the universe inserts his presence into the universe, which is there continuously anyway, or reveals his presence, and interacts and lays out the ways in which he wants human beings to behave. We're talking now about a project of really supreme importance. It's creating that means of connecting Hashem to the Jewish people. If they invented that means, the very connection between God and the Jewish people is a matter of our own religious intuition and creativity rather than an injection from God himself. Well, that ain't it, boys and girls. That ain't it. That's not the way that Judaism works. If you'll take a look, you know what? Let's look at it together because it's really actually Pasha. There we are. This is the dream that Jacob has with the ladder. Take a look at page 145. This is the famous dream with the ladder with the angels going up and down. Right? I want one tiny detail. Verse 12, at the top of the page. He dreamt, and behold, a ladder was set earthward. Now again, these are words that you never use. You've never heard that word in your life. Right? What does earthward mean? Towards the earth. The ladder was set towards the earth. Well, if it's set towards the earth, where's this coming from?
Heaven, above.
It's coming from heaven. As you see in the following words, it links it to heaven and earth. So it's coming from heaven to earth. That's how contact is made. Hashem sets up the ladder by creating the contact, and the human beings respond to that contact in one way or another. So that's the problem over here in 497. The problem is, it's a philosophical problem. You're introducing an element which is philosophically incompatible with the Torah's picture of how God and mankind interact and how God runs the universe. Now, I must say that as a philosopher, it causes me a little, I should say, either disappointment or discomfort, because for the prime of idol worship, there's no way back. There's instant annihilation. For the philosophical crime of taking it upon yourself to do and so forth, there's room, there's wiggle room. Yeah, Moses can plead, and God says, okay, all right, I won't destroy them. I'll spread it out over the generations and so forth and so on. In other words, the philosophical crime is secondary importance to the crime of idol worship. Okay, as a philosopher, I just have to accept that. That what I'm interested in is only of secondary importance, not primary importance. Those who study the laws of idol worship are doing something more important than what I'm doing. But that's the objection here. That's what the first clause in 8 is doing. It's explaining what the essence of the crime is. The essence of the crime is you want to make it up on your own. Now, I say this with particular emphasis because I grew up in a non-religious home, and we were members of a Reformed synagogue, and this was precisely their attitude towards Judaism. Make it up as you go along. Do what feels good. Create things that are meaningful to you. And this, among many other places, gives you the idea, that traditional Judaism is absolutely opposed to that attitude towards how Judaism should be lived. So that's the explanation here, the explanation why those died and the others didn't. Are we together so far? Okay, now let's go back to verse 4 on 495. The second half of verse 4 was a sentence which had a few problems. And one of it was, it says, they said, this is your God, Israel, or God's brought you up in the land of Egypt. And we asked, who's the they? So far on the page, the only two subjects you have are Aaron and the people. And it says, the statement is, this is your God, O Israel. So the speakers are speaking to Israel, so they can't be Israel. You got to be somebody else. Well, it is somebody else. And I'll show you who it is. Second. Second. I think it's the, I'm sorry, it's in the Parshas Bo. The shop. Yeah, take a look at page 359. This is describing the initial exodus from Egypt. Verse 37. The children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkos, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. Also, a mixed multitude went up with them, and flock and cattle, very much livestock. Mixed multitude. Multitude means lots and lots of something. Peas, pebbles, stars, who knows? And it was mixed. They're not all the same. A mixture, a multitude of something or other. Now let's see, what could that be? For example, could it be animals they took with them? Why not? Look at the verse carefully. Read each word. I think you should find a word which indicates that it can't be animals. A word. Which single word shows that it can't be the animals?
Up.
Huh?
Up.
Up? Why not? Wait. Look carefully. One of the things you have to do is learn how to read.
And?
How about the word and? What does it say? Also a mixed multitude went up with them, and flock and cattle, very much livestock. If it's and animals, then the mixed multitude can't be animals. It's got to be something else. So what went up with them other than animals? The answer is other people. We weren't the only slaves in Egypt, and the Egyptian power is broken. Also, some Egyptians were impressed with what went on and decided to join the party. There was a mixed multitude of non-Jews who accompanied the Jews when they left Egypt. Now, back to 495. What does God say to Moses when he explains to them what happened? Verse 7, Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, go descend, for your people that you brought up from the land of Egypt has become corrupt. Now wait a second. Didn't Moses take the Jewish people up And aren't they God's people? So the guys were fobbing them off of Moses. They're your guys, They're not mine, they're yours. So the Midrash steps in to answer this question. You see the text needs some explanation. And it says, that mixed multitude, how did they get on board? They volunteered to come. Well, Moses knows that he's not running the show. God has to agree to it. And Moses says, let's take them. And God says, not a good idea. Not a good idea. And Moses, as he often did, says, why not? It'll expand your presence in the world. More people will come to be dedicated to you and so forth and so on. And God says, listen, I'm telling you, it's not a good idea. And Moses pushes and says, no, I think it's important that we should do it. God says to him, all right, but it's your gang. It's your project. And take responsibility for it. And now God is calling in the chips, so to speak. I told you not to do it. Who's the they who said, this is your God who Israel brought them out? This is the mixed multitude. They were the ones who instigated it. They were the ones who initiated it. They come out of Egypt. The Egyptians are chasing them. They come to the sea. They're trapped. God saves them when Moses sticks out his hand with a rod. And their enemies are coming to attack them, and Moses sticks out his hand with a rod, and they're all drowned. And they need food to eat, and Moses says, let there be food from heaven, and there's food from heaven. Everything's coming through Moses. Moses disappears. This mixed multitude of non-Jews who don't have parentage going back to the patriarchs, who didn't live as slaves and become, some of them did live as slaves and become freed, but they didn't have that Jewish heritage. They panicked. Who's going to save us? So they go back to their roots, to their idol-worshipping roots, and they're looking for an idol that they can, and especially a statue, which can be a representative of the idol that they can use, and they take it as idol worship. Now, they take it as idol worship. How are they going to sell it to the Jewish people? Jewish people don't have that ultimate heritage, although they broke down their barriers, some of them in the land of Egypt. So they sell it to the Jewish people as a replacement for Moses in order to get them on board. But their goal, their whole motivation is idol worship. And a very small proportion of the Jewish population is infected by their crime. About how many? About 13,000. The 3,000 that the Levites kill, and the 10,000 who were killed in the plague, who knows, approximately. And that's where the whole impetus for the idol worship comes from. It comes from the mixed multitude. And that's the they said. Now, here you see how the text works. Sometimes the text will encode a fact which is reasonably verifiable. The they has no antecedent in this context. Somewhere else in the book, you ought to get a clue for it. Over there, it says there was a mixed multitude in addition to the Jews. So they're a different population than the Jews. And they can then say, this is your God, oh Israel, and speak to the Jews. I mean, it's a quite reasonable explanation of who the they are. And the text expects you to do the work. Not everything on the page is explained on the page. You have to know other places of the text. You have to know where to look. That's why I have commentators, because the commentators will tell you to do that. Yeah.
So if it's the people that came out of Egypt who incited the idol worship, why does God? It's kind of a two-part question. Why does God threaten to destroy the whole of the Jewish population if they did not incite the idol worshipping? And second of all, why would he not punish Moses for allowing these people to come out of Egypt and incite this idol worship? Why does he then say all of the Jewish people will get destroyed, but you'll be saved and I'll create a new religion stemming from you?
Okay, let's review what we saw about a half hour ago. We remember verse 8 broke into two halves. There was the idol worship, and there was the manufacture of the statue. And we said there's no forgiveness for the idol worship. There's no way back from the idol worship, for Jews anyway. There's no way back. And they were killed. They died right away. And the threat against the nature of the Jewish people was in violating God's initiative that the way in which you behave in the world And the way in which you connect to the Creator is dictated by the Creator, not by your own intuition and own creativity. That's the reason why they were in danger. Nothing in the text says what happened to the mixed multitude. And in fact, the commentators are split. Some say that they were wiped out, and some say that they remained because, after all, you can't hold someone responsible irrespective of his background. These are people who, until 3 months ago, or till, let's say, a year ago when the plague started, had no contact whatsoever with the true picture of the way the universe runs. So, your expectations for them are not your expectations for the Jewish people. This talks about the severity with which you judge the Jewish people rather than what happened with them. And Moses, in a certain way, although for this you have to rely on other sources from the oral tradition, that's one of the deep reasons why he didn't go into the land of Israel. Just as this mixed multitude, so just that whole generation was left behind in the wilderness, so he had to be left behind as well because of that. It's one of the deep. By the way, just since I mentioned it, I just want to put a statement on record. We talk about the oral tradition. You have to realize that the Torah was given to us in two parts, written and oral, and the oral came first. And the written came afterwards. Moses came down from Sinai and for almost 40 years taught Torah to the Jewish people on the basis of what he was taught verbally. And this book, the 5 books of Moses, was only completed at the end of Moses' life, at the end of the 40 years. So they had 40 years of oral instruction, and at the end they got a book. I say that because people have this vague intuition, well, a book is a book, words on a page. That's really solid. That's there, and it'll be there for the next generation. But words are fluid, and people's memories aren't good, and people misinterpret, and so forth and so on, and therefore it's all kind of, marshmallow, and can't take it seriously, and you don't have to rely on it, and so forth and so on. The exact opposite is the case. Rav Hirsch writes about this in detail, that the written Torah is like lecture notes, and the lecture notes are useful for someone who heard the lecture. Someone who wasn't at the lecture and got hold of your notes, if you're good at taking the notes, will not be able to figure out anything. So anyway, the oral tradition preserves information which the written Torah didn't record, at least not directly, and that's where you get this idea that he was really punished for that. Okay, so the bottom line here is that the story is not a story of national idol worship. It just isn't. And the careful attention to the text and the use of logic shows you that. There are otherwise intelligent people and well-meaning people who aren't trained to read this way. And they present, especially, let's say, we'll have the Christian world and the Muslim world, who at least pledge allegiance to the text as a holy text, but when they read it, they don't take it seriously enough to pay careful attention to the language and to try to have a consistent picture of the text as a whole, rather than just what's written in a particular paragraph, and they pervert the meaning of the text in many ways, and often to the unfair detriment of the Jewish people. And when this is presented as a case of national idol worship, that is exactly what they do. They present it in that way, as an unfair detriment. And when you hear people say, it says so in the Bible, you should think, maybe yes and maybe no. It depends upon what it says. And you need really be able to go through it with a good commentary, either a human being or a written commentary, which can explain the nuances on the basis of knowledge of the text as a whole. I'll give you one more point of support for this, and then I'm going to quit. I heard this from Yaakov Weinberg, I think on a tape, many, many years ago. When Yerovam ben Nevat establishes the northern kingdom, when there's a split between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And he was induced to do that by a prophet. So the setting up of the northern kingdom was justified. He set up 2 temples, and in those temples he put golden calves. Surprise, surprise, golden calves. And not only did he do that, but he did it by taking counsel with his advisors. And they said, you remember our ancestors when they left Egypt? What did they do? They made a golden calf, didn't they? What a good idea that is. Let's make golden calves for our temples. They did it. We should do it. Now you think, wait a minute. You know, this sounds like leftism in America. Wasn't that a disaster? I mean, wasn't that a terrible crime? Didn't they almost risk the annihilation of the Jewish people? Why in heaven's name would you want to copy that? So Rav Weinberg said the following. He said, yes, it was a disaster, but not everything about it was a disaster. They had a whole scenario, and there was a mistake. But if you correct that mistake, the rest of the scenario can teach you how to act. What was the mistake? The mistake was you strayed from the path which I commanded. You did it on your own. But Jerusalem, that's not true of me. God told me to set up a kingdom. How are you going to have a kingdom if all the people in my kingdom 3 times a year have to go to the competitor's kingdom and worship in his temple? That's obviously impossible. Just like when God tells me to set up a kingdom, he wants there to be a police force, he wants there to be a bureaucracy, and he wants there to be your own laws and so forth and so on. Of course he wants me to have my own places of worship. So now I'm doing this because God wants it. Now what shall we do? Well, take a calf like they did. They weren't stupid. Obviously a golden calf was a good idea. The only problem was they invented it. The problem wasn't the item itself. The problem was they invented it without being commanded. No, I believe that we are commanded, and therefore we should do it. Otherwise, how could they possibly say, our ancestors did this, let's do it again? It's insane. And that's what the text says. So this is another support for the idea that the problem here was not the problem of the item itself, but really just the fact that they took it into their own hands to do it. Okay, so that's